Hello everyone, and welcome to my talk on the level design for open world games. Open world games are not new, but they have become increasingly popular. They attract players with their promise of freedom, but they also catch the interest of publishers with their business prospects. Open world can be defined as games offering a vast environment where players will enjoy freedom. Freedom of movement, of course, but also freedom of selecting objectives and freedom of developing their character as they want. As a result, we can see open world games like sandboxes. But for us, designers, open world games are not games that are just bigger. There is something unique about those games. It is a fact that it is the open world itself that draws players' attention, not the game system. You see, in most games, the design team defines first the core gameplay, then tackles the level design. The level design serves as a field of application for the game system. But in an open world game, the opposite is best. First, you should define the main features of the open world, then select the most suitable game mechanism. As a consequence, level design should be considered more important than game mechanics. Tackling the level design for an open world is a huge task. How to start when you are facing the white page? What are the key issues to address? The solution is to ask the right questions during the planning phase. And my purpose today is to help you make the right choices when you are planning your open world. My name is Pascal Luban. I'm a creative director and game designer, and I work as a freelance. I started working on games nearly 25 years ago, and the first AAA game I worked on as lead game designer was Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, which was the 4th episode in the series. Then I worked as a lead level designer on the multiplayer version of 2 Splinter Cell games, which were Chaos Theory and Pandora Tomorrow. And I also worked as creative director on Wanted Weapons of Fate. Eventually, as you know, the market changed focus, and most of my clients asked me to work on mobile games. So for a good 10 years, I worked essentially on mobile games, either as a designer or a consultant. Of course, during that period, I did work on a few console titles as well. Activision commissioned me to work as game and level design consultant on free hunting games. Those games were developed by Fun Labs in Romania. And now the industry seems to be shifting back its attention to console and PC, away from casual games on mobile. So more recently, I have worked on Steam and Xbox games. And of course, several of them were open world games. So, when tackling the level design of an open world games, there's a key question that must be asked first. Why do we want an open world? What purpose will it serve? An open world is very expensive to develop, and it should not be a beautiful background for the game. It must serve a higher purpose. And there are 3 possible usages for the level design of an open world game. 3 design strategies. The purpose of the first strategy is to conquer players' time. The objective of this strategy is to offer a huge lifespan to the game. And this strategy is central to the design of many Ubisoft games. It is achieved by increasing the number of quests, renewing the content of the open world constantly, and supporting a farming mechanism. Now, what are the benefits of this strategy? First, it gives great value to players. It is easier to spend a good deal of money if you know that you are buying yourself 50+ hours of gameplay. Then, the longer players are engaged in a given game, the more chance there is of selling them additional content, DLC, cosmetic items, and so on. And you know, those additional revenue have become a significant complement to the income generated by the sales of the basic games itself. And lastly, when a game is played for a long time, it remains present in the media and the minds of the players for a longer time. So its publisher can strengthen the brand and therefore increase the value of its IP. But this strategy also features weaknesses. First, the player's experience is highly repetitive. Those games achieve long playtime by asking players to do over and over the same things. Second, it is more difficult to integrate a convincing narrative into it. Why? Because such worlds are not realistic, and the storyline is diluted in countless missions. So let's see now a second strategy to use the map in an open world game. The second use of the level design in an open world game is to improve immersion. Red Dead Redemption 2, or the first titles in the Assassin's Creed series, are good examples of this strategy. The purpose of this strategy is to seduce players by transporting them to a universe that is credible and that interests them. And this high level of credibility is obtained thanks to the attention to details, the historical references, and the behaviors of the non-playing characters. Now, let's look at the benefits of this strategy. The first strong point of the is the attractiveness of the chosen theme. Players interested in the unique theme of a game will naturally be attracted to that game. Second benefit, this strategy makes it easier to implement quality storytelling. If the game world is credible, then it's easier to build characters and plots that are also credible. As a result, narrative will be much better. And I believe in the importance of good storytelling. It attracts players and has shown that it can bring real added value to many games. Think of The Last of Us, which perfectly combines efficient gameplay with high quality storytelling. On the negative side, this strategy tends to make the game more complex to develop and therefore more costly. Why? Because the world must be filled up with a lot of unique content, and I insist on that, unique content. And that's not the case in a game, in a world that uses the same assets over and over. This strategy can also have a negative impact on the gameplay. Why? First, the need to make the game environment credible has an impact on the density of actions offered to the player. You might have noticed, for those of you who have played it, that there are less things to do in Red Dead Redemption 2 than in other open world games. And compare it to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where the whole world is filled up with things to do and so on. Things to loot, things to fight, things to find, and so on. Yes, it makes the world denser, but it's not credible at all. And second, it can also have an impact on the progression of the player's character, skills, and equipment. And obviously, that could weaken the gameplay. And finally, there's a third strategy to use the map in an open world game. The map is the challenge. This strategy is at the heart of survival games such as The Long Dark, DayZ, or The Forest. Now you see, in most open world games, the map is mainly used to provide resources, to stage combats, and to give an environment to missions. It means that the map has no gameplay function. It is just a stage where actors do their work. But when the map itself is the challenge, moving in the map and finding resources become the gameplay. That's a case of survival or parkour-based games. For instance, in survival games, the challenge for players consists in knowing how to get around and how to find the resources essential to survival. So the map is a central component in the game system, not a simple background that links quests or action scenes. Now, what are the benefits of this third strategy? On the positive side, the game experience offered by those maps are better adapted to hardcore gamers. The mechanism of survival and parkour games can be complex. So they offer a more hardcore positioning for the game. And then such games do not necessarily favor combat. So they can also seduce players tied by combat or those who favor cooperative gaming experience. But this strategy also features weaknesses. First, survival and parkour gameplays can be complex for the least experienced players. It is not a coincidence that there are few survival games on home consoles. Another weakness is that for survival games, at least, core gameplay tend to be the same from game to game, therefore weakening their attractiveness. So of course, we have reviewed those three strategies, and few games choose a unique strategy. There are examples. For instance, DayZ focuses on strategy number 3, and The Witcher 3 develops strategy 2, essentially. That's because Witcher 3 is above all an action-adventure game based on strong storytelling, and the open world is relatively little exploited. But many other games build their gaming experience by combining this strategy. For instance, Red Dead Redemption 2 mixes strategies 1 and 2, and The Long Dark developed strategies 2 and 3 in an original way by offering different game modes. The survival mode offers hardcore survival gameplay, and the so-called Wintermute mode is built around a linear story that offers easier survival gameplay. So, my first key learning is the following one. When preparing the map for an open world game, make sure you have a clear idea of its use. So far, we have defined the purpose of the level design for our open world game. It is time now to draw the open world itself. Now that's the mission for the level design team. And the mission for the team which is responsible for the design choice is now to define a high-level document which will describe the major features. This task is complex because it is necessary first to respond to the constraints imposed by the strategies we defined earlier. Second, to respect the golden rules of any good level design. And third, to give proper instructions to the people that will actually build the map. So I recommend using a method, which I'm going to describe right now. This method allows you to ask the right questions in the right order. So first question, do we want an open world map of a large continuous map, or do we want to split it in several smaller maps? Actually, both cases exist. Ghost Recon Wildland offers a huge continuous map. And actually, it's also the case for the games in the Far Cry series. On the contrary, the world of The Long Dark is made up of a dozen medium-sized maps. And switching from one to the other interrupts the game for the map to load. You usually go through some kind of you go through a cave or a train tunnel or whatever, you know, so there's some kind of way to know that you're going to go to another map. And both options have their merits, obviously. The first option, the continuous map, is more elegant from a technical point of view and more comfortable for players, obviously, because there's just no loading time. But the second option is better suited to huge worlds like a continent, an entire planet, or even a portion of the galaxy. And when you think about it, it makes sense. What is the point of offering a huge world if it is repetitive or filled with emptiness? The second question is related to the content of the world. The game in the Division series offers a uniform map. And the Division 2, for instance, takes place in the center of Washington, D.C. It's beautifully detailed, but it's always the same. Large streets, narrow alleys, courtyard, plaza, building interiors, always and the same stuff over and over. On the contrary, Subnautica features different areas, and we discover them as we unlock the ability to dive deeper and deeper. And this last option offers multiple advantages. First, to fight against the monotony of the environment. And this is true in the Division 2, which is a great game, but after a few hours, you don't pay attention to the background anymore because it's always the same. So offering different environment, I think it's a smart way to get your player hooked to the game. Second benefit of the Subnautica options. It's the possibility to introduce new gameplays. Obviously, if you go to different areas, you can have different opponents, but more importantly, different kind of challenge in terms of survival, navigation, parkour, and so on. And third, it is also to contribute to the feeling of progression of the player. But of course, this last strategy is expensive in terms of graphic assets. There's also a cheaper alternative to offer diversity to players. It is to alternate between day and night. This approach was implemented in Days Gone. The map remains the same, but it changes between the day and night. The topology remains exactly the same, but the behavior and density of the enemies change. There are much more enemies outside during the night, and the way they behave is completely different. A third question is, do we want players to move freely in the map, or do we want to control their progression? Of course, we can allow players to move freely in the map to go anywhere. That option is more realistic, and it goes well with the feeling of freedom which players are often looking for in open world games. But actually, many open world games limit players' movements. For instance, in Far Cry Primal, players must unlock the grapple hook to access certain areas in altitude. Or in The Witcher 3, it is the progression of the main story that blocks access to new areas. However, between these two options, complete freedom or controlled progression, there's an alternative. Some games use a mixed system which allow total freedom of movement while discouraging players from going everywhere. For instance, in the Division 2, all the districts of Washington, D.C. are accessible on foot from the very start, all of them. But players quickly understand that if they have not reached a minimum level, they have no chance of surviving against the enemies which are present in certain zones. So this is a pretty smart way to make sure that if players want, they can explore everywhere, but actually they will not do that. They will unlock the map section by section simply because they have not leveled up enough their equipment. Very smart strategy. Question 4 has to do with navigation. You see, good games are built around gameplays, obviously. And as you know, good gameplay rests on the challenge offered to players. In action games, for instance, challenge is related to combat. If players don't do well in combat, it's a game over. But other gameplays could be implemented, and one of them is navigation. Navigation can become a gameplay if finding the way is a challenge, and I'm going to explain. First of all, let's talk about games that do not use navigation as a gameplay. For some games, like GTA, navigation is not the gameplay. Those games provide navigation tools like a minimap or in-game icons that help players find their way in a large map. So for those games, designers have decided that there's no point in complicating players' experience by forcing them to find the right path. So this is the case, as I said, in GTA games. But in other games, navigation is part of the gameplay. To find paths, to discover hidden passages, to reach points of interest, or just not to get lost. In the long dark, if you get lost, you just die. You die of hypothermia. So navigation is a key element of survival in the long dark. In the long dark, players must read the environment around them to guess where to go. As in reality, players do not have some kind of magic tools to find their way. They can only count on their sense of observation to know where to go and how to find the passages. So in this case, it is necessary to give clues which allow players to foresee the existence of points of interest or path. For instance, in these pictures, a road sign makes it possible to guess that the road is hidden under the snow. Otherwise, there would be no way to guess this road there. Smoke in the distance can also point to places of interest, or a stream can become a way of traveling, and so on. So the topology will channel player and will reward those that show logic and have a sense of observation. So of course, when you follow this strategy, zones must be constructed by planning the main traffic routes, placing points of interest logically, and providing clues to give players a chance to find these two elements. Logic is key. Question 5 deals with an important dimension of open world maps: resources. Resources are important for players' progression. Collecting them will drive players to explore the map and take risks, of course. And here there are two strategies when it comes to positioning resources. First strategy is to scatter resources more or less evenly. If you do so, you force players to explore every corner in the map to find them. But because resources can be anywhere, players don't have the opportunity to make good or bad choices. They just need to wander in the map to find resources. So in other words, they make no choice. And as you know, good gameplay is based on granting players the opportunity to make good or bad choices. So this is why I recommend another strategy: to group resources around points of interest and make the journey to those points of interest exciting. And you can do that by channeling movements of players and staging the path with interesting points of view, artifacts to find, encounters of opportunity, and maybe the use of alternative means of transport. Thus, going to a point of interest becomes a mini adventure rather than being a monotonous interval. Question 6 helps you prepare the work for level designers. Now, to do so, you must prepare what is called a level design grammar. A level design grammar is a set of construction rules. The level design grammar will define where players are most likely to find a given resource. For instance, mushrooms can only be found in the woods at the feet of large trees. Such rules are very important from the gameplay point of view, because once players have understood that a given resource can be found in a given type of location, they will not search for resources randomly. They will take smarter decisions. Personally, as a rule of thumb, I would say that randomness does not make good level design. I really want to stress this point. It is super important that the player takes the time, or I would say that the player gets the opportunity to learn the map. Learning the map means there are rules of positioning, rules of behavior, and so on. And by doing that, the player will actually enjoy playing the game even more because he will feel smarter. As he discovers those new rules, he will be empowered. He will have the feeling that he's getting to control the world where he plays. And that makes much, much better level design. So rule described in a level design grammar mainly concerns the following points. The point of appearance of resources, as I described, but also the location and behavior of animals, visual clues intended to facilitate the movement of players, and of course, size and volume templates for path and objects with which player will interact, like blocks behind which the player can hide and so on. The last two questions are a bit less important. If you want to immerse players in a credible universe, it must be animated. Effects of wind, smoke, flock of birds, characters moving in the background, rain, and so on. These animations do not necessarily contribute to the gameplay, but make the player's experience more immersive. So I recommend to position the most spectacular ones at key locations on the map, or even to stage them by guiding the player toward them. For instance, the discovery of a waterfall can become a memorable moment and serve as a support for a point of interest. And finally, if possible, it is wise to plan 1 or 2 spectacular scenes. They will feed the buzz and contribute to communications on the game. So it's a good thing to plan such scenes early on because they are obviously costly to develop. So my second key learning is the following one. Find answer to those 8 questions before getting your drawing board out. You will save time, money, and you will make a much more interesting map. A bad map is a map which is drawn without any thought, without any planning. So what I'm telling you to do is that if one day, and I hope that will happen to you because it's a great work. If you happen to have to design an open world map, it is worth to spend just a few days pretty fast to ask yourself those questions. And once it is done, then you will have like a clear vision of what to do and your map will be much more interesting. And of course, those questions also imply the initial choice of strategy, the thing we talked initially first. Another important point, another important issue to address during this planning phase is the way the level design will support storytelling. So I believe that storytelling is becoming more and more important in action games, in particular for open world games. And I want to cover now a few good practices for level design to support the narrative dimension of the game. Now, as a reminder, good storytelling is based on 3 components. The first one is the main character. We forget too often that the main character is at the heart of any good story. A plot is interesting only because it relates the way a character to whom we have become attached confronts a drama. So any good narration begins with the definition of an interesting character for whom the audience will develop attachment. The second component is the plot. A plot serves only one purpose: to create the conditions for drama and to generate suspense until the last moment. Writing a good plot, responds to rules that have been the same since the Greek tragedies. I'm not going to cover them now, it will take too much time, but writing good plots is well documented. And the last key component is the environment. The environment is not just a graphic background. It contributes to the power of storytelling by providing a framework that will reinforce the drama. For instance, a story about the survival of a group of passengers would be more dramatic if the plane crashed in high altitude mountains rather than on an island in the Pacific. It makes sense. Now that we have reviewed the basics, I'm really sorry, I would love to speak more about storytelling, but that's not the point of this presentation. So we have reviewed very quickly the basic. Let's see now how level design and storytelling can support each other. Now, it depends on the importance you give to storytelling. And the level design of the open world will not be the same. To illustrate my point, I will compare two games. Red Dead Redemption 2 and The Witcher 3. These two games are interesting because they are both open world games and their respective development studios have put a lot of resources into the storytelling. However, they chose two very different approaches. Red Dead 2 takes place in the American West at the turn of the 20th century. And I must say that the representation of this era is astounding in credibility. In that game, we follow the adventures of a group of outlaws who seek to flee the law, of course, but above all, they seek to reach some kind of a paradise on earth, a place where they can all live in peace. In this game, the plot is a simple thread, a pretext to justify the journey of the group and the main game missions. The narrative effort is mainly based on non-players' characters and the way they interact with Arthur, who is the character controlled by the players. Rockstar paid a lot of attention to secondary characters, their appearance, of course, but also their personality, their way of expressing themselves, their morality, and their motivations. Those characters are amazingly credible, and we spend a lot of time with them. We end up developing real feelings, affections, or dislike toward them. And like in a TV series, the developers of the game have focused on the characters, not the plot. And believe me, that's a rare move in the video game industry. As a consequence, the impact of storytelling on level design itself is low, except on one point, of course, the environment. Now, let's take a look at The Witcher 3. In that game, the developers made different choices. They focused on the plot and the environment. In The Witcher 3, the main plot is better constructed than the one in Red Dead 2. It is built around a dramatic objective, the search of Ciri, the adopted daughter of the hero. The plot is obviously well written. It involves interesting twists, and contrary to many games, the secondary quests are often very interesting. Those secondary quests get us to meet touching characters and heartbreaking family situations. The environment itself is carefully crafted. It's a land of wars and soldiery. And the locations and the landscapes are not that spectacular. We are far away from the epic backgrounds of the Lord of the Ring. But the Witcher 3 world is credible. The game is a credible representation of a European country ruined by wars during the Middle Ages. And this is reflected in the behavior of the characters encountered. Whether they are simple peasants, warlords, or monarchs, after a few hours of play, we are really taken by a very special atmosphere. It's a mixture of despair, cruelty, but also of humanity. What I want to say here, and just look at the screenshot I chose. Technically, they are very well done, but nothing spectacular. Most of the game is like that. Does it mean the environment is boring? No, because the game environment, from the storytelling point of view, is not only, the topology, the forest, the cities, the mountains. No, the environment is, the context of the story. And in this game, that's why personally I like it very, very much, is that somehow, you really feel like you are back in the 14th century in Europe, and you know that during those times, most of the people were suffering. Obviously, in many games, we're always playing, the hero who is surrounded by soldiers and knights and so on, and this is absolutely not the real life. In The Witcher 3, you are meeting everyday people, peasants, simple soldiers, and so on. And it makes the environment so more engaging because you really believe you are there. Sorry, I was a bit long, but this game is absolutely extraordinary. And in The Witcher 3, the characters, for their part, have less depth because they tend to be stereotypical. The dark and taciturn hero, the mentor full of wisdom, the warrior companion, and so on. So we are less attached to them because they lack thickness, and the game does not offer enough opportunity to get to know them better. So in The Witcher 3, the impact of storytelling on level design is major. It dictates the mood of the environment, and its missions drive the construction of the map. This is quite different from other open world games where the environment is built first, then the design of missions are adapted to existing landscapes. So this is my third key learning. The content of the map in open world games will be different depending on the focus of the storytelling, which means it is very important to involve from the very start of the game project the team who will be in charge of writing the story. I will briefly conclude this section devoted to storytelling with a few good practices. Good storytelling is built around the main character, and this rule applies to video games as well. So the first step is to develop main characters to whom players will become attached. For that, we have to give them thickness, make them credible. Then they must be thrown into personal crisis, and no need to give them the mission to save the galaxy to make their quest exciting. We can do it simply by threatening their loved ones. Once players have taken for themselves the drama of the main character, their engagement in the game will be overdriven. Even if the game only offers repetitive quests and game mechanics that focus on farming. So my point is that even if your game is repetitive, okay, because you are focusing on farming, players progression, and so on, you can still make it spellbinding by working hard on the storytelling. Another good practice is to build missions around dramas experienced by non-playing characters, not only those experienced by the main player. All open world games offer missions to players. They are not always interesting, as you know, and they appear most of the time for what they are, simple pretext for action and looting. But if the creative direction of the game gives importance to the narrative dimension, then much more attention must be paid to the content of the mission. For instance, when players are moved by the distress of an NPC during an encounter, they will become obviously much more involved in the mission related to this character. And as you know, The Witcher 3 offers a magnificent example of such missions. Another thing which I think, another best practice is to take the time to write mission and to script them like real adventure. The interest of carefully scripting a mission is to control what players will experience. The game pace, interesting tactical situations, the presence of difficulty peaks, dramatic narrative twists, and situations presenting moral choices. Level designers should stage the missions that they will bring to players. In particular, they can get players to go through missions whose course is not predictable. To do so, we must cross the skills of level designers and scriptwriters. And to me, one of the best examples in my eyes are the missions of Stalker, the shooter developed by GSC Game World. What I'm trying to say here is that to do a good mission, is not only to position enemies and loot. Good missions should be written exactly like mini adventures. It takes time, and often it implies to be written before backgrounds are done, but that's a mistake. Too often what happens is that the backgrounds are built first by the graphic teams. They try to do the best job they can, and after that, the mission designers, have to build the missions. This is the wrong way to do it. I strongly recommend to write the key missions first and then develop specific backgrounds for it. Finally, last good practice is to be aware of mandatory missions. So of course, it depends on the game. If your game is driven by the storytelling, so obviously you must have mandatory missions, but make sure they're not too hard. You don't want to get the player stuck because he cannot complete the mission. Remember, if the game is built around storytelling, this is what is getting people attracted to the game. So you want to let them finish the game. So the main missions should not be too hard. You can make harder missions for the side missions. But if your game is not based on strong storytelling, if your open world is more like a sandbox game, so in that case, I recommend, to avoid mandatory missions, because they could block players and therefore frustrate them. So my conclusion after that time, designing a map for an open world game seems like a formidable task. But if you ask yourself the right questions during the planning stage, before you actually draw the map, you increase the chance of turning the map into the star of the game. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you find this talk interesting. I want you to know that I publish on Gamasutra on a regular basis. So of course, I talk about many topics, not only level design. I also publish a quarterly newsletter. So if you want to get it, just use the QR code and subscribe. Thanks again, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.